but we're off to a great start. And today's discussion is going to help us figure out some of those ideas and themes that can best be used in the Iranian American community. Our first speaker is Lucy Bernholz. We're delighted to have Lucy with us, so thank you for giving your Sunday to be here. Lucy is the president of Blueprint Research and Design. She studies the sector of philanthropy. She looks at trends, emerging practices, and especially in the area of technology. So we're delighted to have Lucy be our opening speaker. As the day proceeds, as you look through the agenda, you'll see we have other speakers on different topics. Each one will be interviewed, in a sense, in a conversation with a representative from PARSA, so we're looking forward to that dialogue. After Lucy, we have Sally Osberg, who is the president and CEO of the Skoll Foundation, which is one of the a very large and very influential foundation involved in social entrepreneurship. We have Talat Hassan, who is the chair of the board of the India Community Center, so we're learning from another ethnic group. Gail Kong, who's the executive director of the Asia Pacific Fund, looking at philanthropy in the Asian American community. Archana is kind enough to spend most of her day with us, and we'll be looking at her lessons from working with a range of Middle Eastern organizations and connecting them to mainstream American foundations. And then finally, we'll have Nushin Hashemi in conversation with Michael Chertok, who is with the Gates Foundation, which is also very, actually I think the largest foundation, if I'm not mistaken, in the world. So without taking any more time from the content, I'm just delighted now to introduce Lucy Bernholz, who is going to give our opening address.
And I'm too short to use the podium. But I'm from New York, so I speak loudly and clearly. So hopefully that'll work. I'm delighted to be here. Community philanthropy holds a very special place in my heart. I've been very fortunate. It's held a very special place in my professional career. And so I'm hoping, I wish I could spend all afternoon with you. I do have to leave right after I'm done hearing some questions from you, because it's my 9-year-old's birthday, and some things take precedence over everything else. But you all are the experts in what it's like to be an Iranian American, the transformational moment. Several of you referenced about being part of the Iranian American culture. I wish I could learn more about. Maybe we'll get a chance to share some of them with you. And from some of your introductions, I bet many of you are far more expert than I am in technology. So what can I offer you? I can offer you a little bit of perspective on how technology has changed the business of giving, mostly in the US, but it's increasingly changing the global face of philanthropy, and hopefully offer you some examples and some lessons, and I'll probably rapid fire list a number of web services and other community efforts that I'm happy to follow up with examples later. How many of you are familiar with the what's going on in the news business, newspapers, broadcast television, driven by the changes coming from digital technology, the internet, social networking, or at least heard about it, sort of, that's what's happening to philanthropy. Same thing, same exact set of things. What used to be a centrally held, broadcast, proprietary set of expertise is now being created outside of the walls of the institutions that used to hold it. It's being shared, those walls are much more porous, and it's changing in a much more dynamic and rapid way. So I want to give you a couple of categories for thinking about that, and to each of those categories I'm going to hook a few tech examples, and then hopefully you'll ask me questions so I can be most useful to you. For years, and have one other question, thanks. I'll start, Phil Donahue here. How many of you have seen the long tail of a market, that curve? You're familiar with, you get an X and a Y axis, and you got a lot of things clustered at one side, and it distributes out very long down the end. That long tail applies to giving. There's a long tail of giving. That's exactly the way the market of donors is organized. in this world. At one end, you have the Gates Foundation and the Burroughs Wellcome Trust, the two largest foundations in the world, one based here in the US, the other based in the UK. Then you've got a fat middle of very generous individuals, some who've organized their giving through community foundations and private foundations and charitable trusts. And then you have a long tail of giving that makes up, in the US at least, 80% or more of all philanthropic, all charitable giving every year, whether they're giving $1 a day or $50 a year, whatever it is. That is the bulk of where the money is coming from. I'm a child of the 70s, so I tend to follow the money when I'm trying to understand a situation. So that's the way the market of revenue is organized. What's been challenging for philanthropy in its old format, like the old newspaper business, was a question really of visibility. It was very difficult for individuals who are interested in making a difference in their communities to get visibility into the sector. How can they find what they're looking for? The NGO directory on your website is a perfect example of a tech solution to that problem, and one that sounds like it's being driven by the NGOs themselves, where they're being given the opportunity to make themselves visible to the donor community. There are tons of tools like that now in philanthropy that really shape the way it works in this country. They're tech solutions to an old problem, but they themselves are only about 10 years old. So everything from GuideStar, Network for Good, Charity Navigator, the newly launched, this is the worst named website in the world, the Repository of Equivalency Determined Organizations, which is, I'm telling you, they need help. Anybody here in marketing, branding, they need some help. But that is an effort to identify, for donors in the US who are concerned about giving and following the tax laws of this country, those organizations outside of the US, all over the world, that meet the 501c3 equivalency determination. They needed a name. But there's that kind of database. It's available, it's publicly accessible, searchable. So visibility into the sector, no longer a problem, completely changed by technology. It's still very hard to get visibility into deal flow. If you're a donor looking for the best organization on a certain issue, or the one where people you respect are donors, or the one that's doing a certain new kind, a really experimental effort, unless you're out there looking, devoting your time to it, seeking those proposals in, doing that kind of legwork, visibility into that deal flow is still hard to find. We're starting to see some very interesting technological solutions to that problem. Some of it comes from places like Facebook and Twitter, where people who are themselves directly engaged in those efforts are turning around and sharing that information with their social networks, their communities. So that's one kind of visibility into deal flow. For the organized philanthropist, be community foundation donor, donor advised fund donor, family foundation donor, it can still be hard to find that visibility into the deal flow. There are some efforts underway. There's some interesting experiments coming from foundations like Gates and others, large staffed foundations who have these staff people committed to this, professionals committed to understanding these sectors, are beginning to realize that in fact they could make a bigger difference if they could leverage other people's money, and they're starting to make their own information more visible. We haven't quite reached that place yet, but that's sort of that's the corner we're standing at and looking around. In the area of volunteering, there's definitely some new tech solutions to that visibility into deal flow problem. One of them comes from a Canadian group that's organized an aggregator called socialactions.com that literally pulls from about 70 different online platforms of information the volunteer, petition signing, donating opportunity, and that aggregates them all into one place, hosted in the cloud, and the idea is that that information can then be dispersed back out to anyone who's looking for it. You may also have heard of a recently launched effort with Craig Newmark of Craigslist at the helm called All for Good, which is a similar aggregator of philanthropic time opportunities that's pulling volunteer opportunities, making them available. So sort of making that deal flow, that opportunity to get involved, making